He was former president of the Dartmouth Club of the Upper Valley.
Okay.
You need to know how to pronounce his name.
Hey. And then we
Sydney,
have,
I'm going to watch your presentation when I get back. So that's
Okay,
an
no
advantage to
problem.
recording it. All right, thanks.
Sure.
then we've got Dennis Kaufman and John Chapin, Ginia Allison, as always, Sean Akhtar, John Engelman, and me, and Mike Gonerman. I have to keep track of how many people are attending, you see. Mike Gonerman, and then joining us from New Jersey is Peter Corin, one of my classmates, who's just told me he is going to move to Enfield and might possibly be interested at some point in getting involved in the Dartmouth Club of the Upper Valley. So that's why I invited him tonight to attend. And he's been very active in his clubs down in New Jersey. So welcome, Peter.
Would Peter like to be the treasurer?
I've been the treasurer, president, secretary, vice president, et cetera, in the last 35 odd years of clubs. So I'll just sit back and watch for a while. Thank you for the offer, though.
You have to watch out what happens if you show up at events. We are apt to recruit you. Okay, now we've got
use headphones.
let's see,
They may have to use it.
Doug French and Tom
Well, of course,
Oxford
you're going to want to use headphones because
joined us.
And you what?
no doubt. Let's see.
Okay, so someone who's just joining us, when Sydney starts her program in a couple minutes, we'll go on mute, and that way we can chat with everyone. Okay. Now we have Anna Hargraves. This is one of the reasons why we chat for a little bit before we started, so that everyone can arrive.
Test speaker and then.
So you can hear us fine.
Yeah, I can hear you. And let's see. Okay, there you found the mute button. That's great. And usually we chat for a little bit, and then Sydney gives her program rather, and then we do some Q&A at the end. We did a few informal questions already, so that there may be a few repeated answers.
She wasn't having a problem with my sound here.
Well, why don't you use it and then I'll go over it.
Okay, now we've
Is
got
Mom gonna watch it?
911-274.
Doug, I think all your voice is coming through.
Yeah. Could you mute your, Doug French, could you mute your computer?
I think he has now. Okay. I can see we've got a couple people that haven't muted, but I can actually mute anyone if I have to.
We'll hear from Buster.
Let's see.
Yes, dear.
Okay.
So why don't you just mute everyone?
Yeah, that's what I'm usually Greg does it. So
Well,
I'm just going to.
I think I'm supposed to give an introduction, so maybe not quite yet.
Okay.
Well, it's impossible to mute John Chapin, so.
That's a good point.
Okay, I am going around muting people. So if for some reason we need to come off mute, then you can put your camera on if you can, and like wave your arm or put something in the chat. Okay, we're going to mute. I'm muting Anne and I'm muting Wayne. Okay, good. We've got excellent attendance and some people I haven't seen at these events before, so this is great. So welcome to the Dartmouth Club of the Upper Valley, to one of our many Zoom meetings. And we're hearing that the campus hopefully is beginning to open up late summer and into the fall. So we may be able to start in-person events again. We're talking about maybe doing at some point welcoming the incoming and local students picnic, which we've done sometimes in the past. At some point, we're going to start doing building tours, but we don't have any schedule for that yet. And that may happen over the course of a year to tour the new buildings and construction sites. And our next meeting, our June meeting, we don't have a date set for it, but we plan to have Gina Barreca speak to us, which should be very good. She's having some scheduling issues right at the moment, so we haven't firmed up the date yet, but we will let you know about that. And our speaker this evening is the director of films, Sydney Stowe, and we're going to have her introduced by John Chapin. John, you may speak and I'm going to mute myself.
Well, very few of you would have any reason to know that Sydney is my first cousin once removed. And therefore I can testify firsthand that she comes from a family of sometimes talented, sometimes difficult individuals. And she embodies the good qualities within our family. And I say to those of you who are over 55, which is a fair percentage of this group, who probably were required to take Latin back in the day, that I thought of a 2-word summary of Sydney, and it is sui generis, which is the Latin for rare or one of a kind. And even within our eccentric family, she's sui generis. She's left a huge mark on the Hopkins Center film satrapy for the last 23 years, I think. Been involved in all sorts of programs that you're familiar with, perhaps the most obvious being Dartmouth Telluride at Dartmouth. And she's brought a certain imagination, I would say, I was going to say youthful vim and vigor, but you're not that young anymore, Sid. And I just think we're lucky to have her as a speaker tonight. And what she has to say is far more interesting than anything I could say in an introduction. So I would turn you over to Sydney Stowe.
Thank you. And I'm actually not sure how this works, but I've got a PowerPoint presentation because I am in the film business, so I prefer to tell my stories through pictures. I think I'm just going to share my screen. I right now see John as the biggest person, so I don't know whether when I share my screen, just let me know if you guys see everything as the main image. This would probably be because I didn't set it right, but I did set it for speaker. So am I the biggest head you all have right now? I am. Awesome. Okay. Thank you. This just tells you even now how little I spend in Zoom. But anyway, thank you, John. And I'm going to start and we will go from there. So basically, I just decided to, oh, sorry, I'm also dog sitting. Basically, I wanted to just give you sort of a picture history of the film office and the film program here. There's decades of it, so it's going to be kind of brief in terms of going through stuff. But if anyone has any questions, you can ask me after, and I'll try and give you sort of a highlights reel. In '99, as you can see with our 50 logo, the Film Society celebrated its 50th anniversary. And we did this brilliant brochure. And this is where I wrote it. So I'm remembering now today, going back and taking a look at some of the history of the Hopkins Center and of the Film Society. These are the men we have to thank. These are really the men for the reason we have the Dartmouth Film Society today and the film program that we have. Blair Watson on the left, Orton Hicks in the middle, and Maury Rapp on the right. And they together, and I'll give you a little bit of information about that in a minute, they together are why film started here at Dartmouth. So the Nugget opened in 1916, and in the 20s and 30s, believe it or not, several Hollywood studio heads sent their sons to Dartmouth. Maury Rapp was here. He was class of 35. His father was Harry Rapp, who ran MGM. Walter Wanger, the famous producer, was here in 15. Joseph Losey, Robert Ryan. Losey was 29. Robert Ryan was 32. They were the first people who came in and just brought film with them to campus. In fact, Walter Wanger was so devoted to Dartmouth. That is where Winter Carnival came from, the film he made immortalizing the college. And he was so interested in film playing on campus that he actually paid an English professor at the time, Benfield Pressey, to go to LA to learn screenwriting so he could come back and actually teach it at Dartmouth. So the Nugget's on, you've got all these alums floating around in classes of late 20s and 30s, and the need for more movies continued to grow among our sons of Dartmouth. And so Maury got together with Blair, who at the time was running Dartmouth College Films, which was our early AV tech department, and they created the Hanover Film Society. And in 1949, in October, they launched their first movie. They decided to do a free screening of $1 Million Legs, the W.C. Fields film. It premiered on October 25th in 1949, sold out in 14 Silsby. So I've yet to find out how many people that actually was. And then they had a meeting. 2 days later, they changed their name to the Dartmouth Film Society. And on November 30th, they launched All Quiet on the Western Front, and another sellout. So they decided, you know what, we've got something here. So they built a 4-piece 14 film program that you could buy a ticket for $4.50. And that was really the beginning of movies showing here on campus. Orton Hicks came in 1958, and that he was the one that came on and also helped with the founding of the Low. So that's where you see he's here in this picture as well. But it was really Maury and Blair that started the Film Society as we know it. When they started it, they believed that people should know about the movies. So as student members and faculty members, because it was a mixed group, they started writing film notes, which this is a process that we did up until only a few years ago. So I just included a couple copies of different film notes, so you could see how people wrote them. And obviously Casablanca got a lot of play because it's in a variety of formats. And then so that sort of started, and we had that. Then in 1963, Spalding opened, and the Little Film Society, which had been showing movies in North Fairbanks, actually had a home in Spalding. And I don't know if you know this, but Spalding is one of the first performing arts centers in the country that had a movie theater projection booth built in at the start. So even then in 63, Dartmouth was planning on having films incorporated into the college experience. And actually in 65, the first conference on the history of film study in academia actually happened at Dartmouth, hosted. And educators, historians, critics, everybody got together to try and figure out, should film be in higher ed? And there's this famous line that there was bitter debate about the role of film and whether film was worth it. And of this fracas, Pauline Kael Riley noted, if you think movies can't be killed, you underestimate the power of education. But this event actually affirmed that film has a role in academic study and led to the formation of the American Film Institute. So this picture is actually, I've jumped a little bit ahead because I wrote my timeline before I actually had the order of the photos. As you can see who this is, Mr. Redford. This came about when Bill Pence came to Dartmouth. And Bill Pence was single-handedly, in my opinion, one of the people that put the Film Society and the Hop Film Program on the map. This is Lillian Gish and Michael Powell. They were here for a tribute to Michael Powell. Redford was here for a tribute to Robert Redford. And this is Bill Pence. And he started at Dartmouth. He founded the Telluride Film Festival in 1973. And in 1983, he came to Dartmouth and as the director of film and my boss. So I wanted to put this in because 2 years later, the Low Auditorium opened underneath the Hood Museum, and Bill started to bring Telluride here. So actually Telluride at Dartmouth began in 1985, the year that the Arthur M. Low Auditorium, which was brought in through the Low theater chain and Low film business, all of the connections that the college had to Hollywood helped create the Low and endow it. And Bill started the opening of the Low with Telluride at Dartmouth. And I'll go back for a second. So this Dartmouth and Hollywood right here, this is a book that was created at the opening of the Low, celebrating the college's historic connections with Dartmouth. And on the right, this is a little piece of memorabilia. I'm not actually sure if that's J.D. Salinger's name on top of that pass, but maybe he never took it, Maybe they were going to give it to him. Maybe he turned it back in. It's a complimentary film pass, but this gives you a little bit of an idea of what our film passes used to look like. And believe it or not, they haven't actually changed that much since then. Here's an old brochure from Telluride at Dartmouth. And this is 11 years in. It started in 1985. And then this is Chuck Jones very famously did this card for us, Dartmouth. And we use this card today still to invite Dartmouth alums to the annual Telluride festival party. So we included this just so you could see, because Chuck Jones, when Bill came in from Telluride, that was really, as I said, the beginning. He was able to bring in artists like Chuck Jones and Ken Burns and Oliver Stone and a lot of people who had their work honored at Telluride. It was an easy ask then to ask them to come to Dartmouth in the form of a tribute and events here with students. When Bill was here, we started, they had the Film Society had always had a theme and programmed along a theme. So here are some examples of some posters that we had done. The Film Society picks the themes, and so we would then build the series around it. When we moved, we were in, even though the Low was open, we just did our art house films in there. The big theme films, when I started working here in '97, were always in Spalding on Wednesdays and Sundays at 6:45 and 9:15. We always had 2 screenings of the same movie. That just to give you an idea of the volume and the demand for film at that time. So I just included a couple of my favorite posters from that era. So as I said, when Bill was here, we really started doing these signature events. Artists would come, they would show their work. This is obviously, as you all know, our annual Ken Burns summer event, where Mr. Burns comes and previews a sneak episode of his newest work and then takes questions from the audience. I think it's one of his favorite shows because he stands in the back and he gets to watch, you know, Ken's films go on television. He doesn't get to see audiences enjoy them. So I think one of the reasons he loves coming up here and his longtime friendship with Bill is that he gets to bring his work and see it live in an audience, which is part of why we're so blessed to have him every summer. I think it's one of the highlights. He always comes during the Proudy, which is super exciting schedule-wise, but it's one of the highlights of the event. This is when we did a tribute to Pixar, and we actually got Sully to come, which frankly was like getting the Pope. And this is the same character that they sent out that actually goes to the White House. So we honored Pixar at Dartmouth over homecoming weekend, and this is still one of the highlights. Was probably the hardest. It was the hardest celebrity visit I've ever done, but I will never forget how exciting Sully was. And the students were insane. And we showed an episode of Monsters Universe. We showed Monsters U, and it was done here. They also wanted to tie it in with the college campus. So it was a real treat. And as you can see, our guests, this is sort of our money shot, we call it. Bassem Youssef's here with Tickling Giants. He came and spoke with campuses across the campus with students, and we showed his film. So this is just an example of some of our favorite events over the last several years. I saw Reversing Row at Telluride, and I asked the 2 directors on the end here, Ricky Stern and Annie Sundberg, are Dartmouth alums, and they came with Texas Senator Wendy Davis and Colleen McDonough, who is a healthcare provider from Ohio, all featured in the film, and they came and did a weekend of events. So we have our one-night tribute events, but we also have a multifaceted student campus engagement events as well. And this one was one where these women were all over town and all over campus for 3 days, and culminating in a screening of Reversing Row. Barry Jenkins was here, which is probably one of the more recent highlights, like David Harbour. We had him here right after Moonlight, but before his next film, and he was a massive hit with the students. He was here for about 36 hours. So sometimes these guys come in very briefly. In addition to these tribute and marquee events, we also do things around film. So we had a film about tango. So we had a tango lesson in the Maffei, which is why I included this, because we always think that there's more to going to a movie than just sitting in the theater in the dark. And so we brought birds in and flew hawks over the audience for Eagle Huntress, which was a huge treat. And they came from Vin's. They were very well behaved. We decided not to use the one that vomits when it's nervous. So we went with just the hawks that they actually felt very safe about. Unfortunately, Vin's doesn't have any eagles, so we weren't able to have those, but we had a sold out show of Eagle Huntress in Spalding, and we collaborated with Vin's on this one. Before two of our films, we had this incredible group of ladies named D-Step, and they performed in front of a film about stepping, and then they also performed in front of Black Panther, which was we had 2 nights of Black Panther. We had 600 the first night and 700 the second, and the students were thrilled. It was probably one of the most successful student events we've ever done, and D-Step performed as a surprise on the Spalding stage both nights before the screening. We also have parties. This is an event after the movie The Farewell that was hosted by the Korean Student Society. So they were here, and this is all of them, frankly, probably just coming for the free food and the pizza, but we do student events after some of our films, and that gets the students to see the screening, so they're not just watching it in their room. This is Spalding and Telluride at Dartmouth, which I think you all know is probably one of the more exciting things that happens. There's our line, and poor Megan discovering just how complicated it is to try and fit 700 people in a hallway before we open the house. This is my beloved Johanna Evans. She has since left and moved on to another position with the virtual platform that we use, but this is us every year. We try and manage the Telluride at Dartmouth mayhem that comes out, and that has been, I think this year is going to be our 34th Telluride at Dartmouth. And I mentioned before that Dartmouth has a long history with Telluride because of Bill, who's in the back of this picture on the right, and the woman next to him in the purple hair is his wife, Stella. These are alums. These are alums and Dartmouth students who went to Dartmouth and have worked at the festival, and they gather every year. So this is the cocktail party that I was referring to with the image from of Daffy Duck. So this is Chuck Jones's image. This is a group of alums that gather every year, and some of us work at Telluride and some of us just attend. So this is a nice little group of like 30 to 40 alums that continue to work at Telluride every year. Ricky and Annie, one of the other things we do in our program, in addition to just showing movies, we have artists, and Ricky and Annie are incredibly generous. And whenever they bring in their new work, they come and do a Q&A with students and a masterclass. And this is Clyde Peterson, who came and brought her new animated film. And this is her with animation students and Professor Jody Mack at the bottom. And she came for an all-day animation masterclass. And then we showed her film, Torrey Pines, which I cannot recommend enough, afterwards. And then our last sort of real live event was a weekend of alums in the business. And we had, I think, 15 alums come. We had seminars throughout the weekend on different topics in the business so that students could attend. This is them all sitting here for a lunch. And then the students would come and ask them questions. And this was a way for students to connect with alums in the film business, of which there's somewhere between 100 and 150 now that are actively working in the film business. And we're working hard to get connections for future mentorship and internship possibilities. When COVID hit, we had to pivot because people weren't going into buildings, people weren't going into theaters in the dark. So we launched Small Screen Fun, which was a series of live virtual conversations. This is a promo movie that Johanna and I made for Olympic Dreams, which was our first one. And we started bringing in guests, and we did these 45-minute, hour-long conversations with people related to the film business, and some alums, some obviously fellows as not. And we brought in students, and we all got to get comfortable on screens. And this is the way we figured we could keep our audience engaged in the film business in a way that was accessible, because these shows are recorded and pushed out to YouTube so people could watch on YouTube, type in questions in the chat. We did several of these. We had Jake Tapper last fall. The boy who harnessed the wind, William Kakamba, is an alum here. He did a piece, and we had an entire 5th grade class tune in because they were reading the book. So it's been a really remarkable, my personal hero and crush, Aisha Tyler. This piece of it has been has been a lifesaver for us, because these shows are very complicated. We show clips, we have slides, we bring in students, but we really get to honor alums in the business and keep the conversation of film foremost in people's minds. But I will not gonna lie, we are really excited to get back to days where we can just sit in the dark with strangers and watch movies. God willing, we're going to be back to our usual, which is about 200 film events a year, between screenings, between the Met Opera, National Theater Live, and tributes and specials. So hopefully this fall, you know, the way will be clear, and people will want to come back to see movies, and we'll be back up and running, because this is why we do it. And I still can't believe they pay me, and I'm so grateful that this is a job. And anyway, that's it. Thank you.
I'm unmuting myself. You all may unmute yourself. So who has some questions for Sydney?
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, John.
Sydney, when I was an undergraduate, and that was in the mid to late 60s, 65 to 68, the Film Society was a huge draw. Perhaps it's because Dartmouth is an all-male institution at that time, and there wasn't that much to do. But the movies that were shown were the truly classics.
Yes.
The movies of some of the silent movies, Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton and so forth, and the classics of the 30s and the 40s and 50s. And it's my impression that you're not showing the classics anymore.
That's
Is
correct.
that because the students don't care about them? I have a theory, one theory on this, and that is students will not watch black and white movies because they were brought up on color television, and they find black and white movies, for whatever reason, boring. And they couldn't be more wrong, but you can't fight the generations.
Well, and you're also talking about a generation that thinks that Tarantino is like Orson Welles to us. I mean, that's what is so odd about timing. So when I started in 97, we were still playing the classics, and we were still getting hundreds of people, because we didn't have Turner Classic Movies.
Right.
People weren't watching these movies at home. And when it started to shift, and we also worked with courses, and they would require their students to attend. And I'll never forget, New American Cinema, Professor Jim Brown, who I adored, said, we cannot require them anymore. The students are now, they can get the movies on a DVD, they can watch it on it, and they can get it in other ways. They can check it out of the library. We can no longer require attendance. So we lost our immediate initial demographic, and people like you have seen Casablanca 5 times. So when we do play it in Spalding, we're really only trying to get the students. And if they don't have to attend for class anymore, or they can watch it on their own time on their computer, that was the beginning of the end for classic film. We still occasionally try and play like Das Boot, or some of the Das Boot, or some of the classics that have been renovated, or restored. But we really find that the audience for it, and as Bill used to say, the prints, if films haven't been maintained, you get prints that are pink, or in the case of Das Boot, someone had cut an entire sequence out of the film that we didn't know. So there was print quality issues, and then there was demand. And then I think there was alternative ways that people could watch these movies. And I think together, and they created a bit of a perfect storm. We found that these movies that we thought would have such draw, and we have our numbers going back for years, just started to dwindle, to the point that until Film Society was going down, the attendance was dropping rather steadily over the first decade that I worked there. And that's when we had to sort of start to shift the programming. And it was really challenging, because for years we had done themes, but we found having to curate by theme ended up becoming really untenable for us, because we were missing new movies that way. And so it was sort of a combination of factors. But the number one is that you're right. Students just weren't coming. They have other options. And even now, our biggest fight is that we play a movie at 7 o'clock on a Friday, and a student can watch it in their fraternity at 11 o'clock from a bootleg copy, or can watch something else on demand. And so the appointment cinema, the thing that we all are used to of like getting up, making a date, maybe having dinner, making a plan, that is not done in this generation because they are used to consuming content when they want, not when we say. And that's a challenge. So we try and pull out the stops, and we try and come up with things like getting student groups involved, and if they're sponsoring a screening. But I agree with you. Our slate has changed significantly since I started here in 97, and definitely from when you were here.
Can I just do a follow-up?
Sure.
Is it your impression that students are watching some of these classic movies on their own time in their own location? I mean, stuff like, I once gave a copy of my DVD of The Great Escape,
Right,
to a group of soccer players who were going on a long trip to Cornell. And they put it on they watched it on the bus.
right.
And none of them had ever seen the movie before. And it has to be one of the most entertaining movies ever made. And they were just blown away by it. And I said, well, I don't know what is going to appeal to you, but I know this sort of has universal appeal. And I think you'll find it entertaining, and they do. So, but again, the question is it your impression that students do turn to?
I think
some of
the
the
Film
great
Society
movies?
students do. And the Film Society kids that continue to meet every week, that our student, they still meet every Monday, or now I think they've moved it to Tuesday, and they agree to have a watch party. So I think they have the watch party on Monday, and then they meet on Tuesday to talk about it. So they are still reaching out and watching those classics. And then in the film classes, they have to watch them. So I don't know, that's what, nothing kills the joy of something like mandatory, but so they are, but of their own accord, that's a really good question. I'm not sure I'm not sure because, what we think are classics, they may think that Clueless, or, we're playing Scott Pilgrim. I was just actually joking about it today. It's 10 years old. We're playing it in our outdoor screening on Friday or Saturday, and students think this is a cult classic. So I think we also have to remember the definition of classic is probably in the eye of the beholder. So I know, I was like, really, Scott Pilgrim? But I agree with you about Great Escape and its current incarnation, Chicken Run, which is like one of the great films in my humble opinion.
So there's no need to be shy. Who else would like to chime in?
So I'll chime in. Wait a minute, am I? No.
Yes, you're on. Yeah, you're good.
I'll chime in with just a quick little story. This goes back to Huntley Allison and I, who both were in the travel business, loved traveling, but I hated big ships. And he always wanted to go on the QE2. And one day he came home and said, darling, how about going to England on the QE2? And I said, no way, not on that big ship. Well, he said, if you could have a glass of wine every night with Ken Burns and Chuck Jones, would that appeal?
Uh-huh.
I said, you bet. And so we went on the QE2 when they did the Telluride at Dartmouth Film Festival. And it was wonderful having a glass of wine with Ken Burns every night. So I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Do it again.
When Bill got into partnership with Turner Classic Movies, I think they have a Turner Classic Movies cruise as well. He definitely, because he was a consultant, after he left Telluride, he stayed in the business of the festivals and consulted. So he's still involved with TCM, and they go afield. I think he even went on a Disney cruise. I think they even curated a Disney cruise as well. So yeah, what I love about Bill is there was no idea that couldn't be explored. And he just thought, get the movies out to everyone in every conceivable way. And we keep trying that on our end now.
Good, wonderful.
So I thought I would give a little more piece of Dartmouth and architecture movie history, which is the first architect to design theaters specifically for movies was a Dartmouth alum, Fred Wesley Wentworth, and he was the one that designed Sci-U, and he designed the addition to Cask and Gauntlet. He was a Cask and Gauntlet member, one of the founding members, and he was based in Paterson, New Jersey, and did these wonderful Art Deco and amazing theaters, which are largely vanished now, but they were designed specifically for showing movies with the fabulous sets inside and everything. So he's a little kind of a forgotten part of architecture history.
Yeah. I think that the atmosphere, I forgot one of my anecdotes in my, writing my notes and then trying to remember how they synced up with my images, but Arthur Mayer came over from Hollywood through Orton Hicks, and he taught a class in 1964 on the history of film. This is back when film studies was not film studies. They were actually
took it.
Theater. You took it.
Well, in 1967. but-
Yes. Well, in 1976, the last year he taught it, he was 90. There
Yeah,
were 200 students in the class.
he was amazing.
That is incomprehensible today. So what I think is so amazing is, I don't know, maybe you guys didn't have enough classes or there weren't any girls. I don't know, but it feels like film had this incredible birthplace here in film appreciation and the Film Society and your class that is unique on college campuses back in the 60s. So I love that you took that class and they,
It was fabulous. He knew everything about the history of movies because he was involved with it from the very beginning in all sorts of roles.
Right.
He was a distributor, he was a publicist, he was a producer. He knew, he'd tell anecdotes about Mae West and Marilyn Monroe and, Clark Gable and so forth. It was fabulous. It was absolutely fabulous. The other Dartmouth alum who had a very successful career producing movies in the 40s and 50s was Arthur Hornblow Jr. Do you know the
Yes.
name?
I do. He's actually he's in my book here.
Okay.
Yes.
He's you can always, the movies that when they put the credits on, it says produced by Arthur Hornblow Jr. and it has his signature as his name. And one of my all-time favorite movies, God, what's the name? I'm having
he
a
was
senior moment. Witness for the Prosecution was produced by Arthur Hornblow Jr.
Yeah, he was a classmate of William Wenger's because they were both 15s.
Okay.
But it was really such an interesting time to see can you imagine growing up in LA, your dad runs a studio and you go to Dartmouth? I can't even imagine what that must have been like, because the co-eds didn't start till what, 72 here?
Fall 72, yeah.
Because Meryl Streep, till she was at not Yale,
Vassar.
He was at Vassar. Yes.
Yeah. And she
Vassar.
did a summer semester here before co-education. And she makes a very funny joke about, striding across the green, being, 18 and blonde and all these boys. And it just, when she was here for her tribute, that was her story about her first experience with Dartmouth. And her son actually ended up going here and being a theater major. So, yeah.
Sydney, I remember vividly when you had special guests who came, Robert Redford being one of them.
Yes.
And it was impossible to get a ticket. But how about that? Is it possible? I remember Glenn Close, I think, also came. Anyway.
And Johnny Depp.
Yep.
They used to sneak in the back to try and get in. They caught Hanover High School girls sneaking into the back of Spalding to see Johnny Depp. I didn't work here then, and I was walking by, I'll never forget, I was walking by the Hanover Inn and this limo pulls up and he gets out. I mean, he may as well have been an alien. I was like, it's like an Elvis impersonator. I was like, that looks like Johnny Depp. How could that be? And I was still working at the bookstore. And then all of a sudden, who gets out next to him? Kate Moss. I'm like, oh my God, it is Johnny Depp. And he was one of the first big celebrity tributes for the student body. Right. And wanted to smoke in Spalding, which of course, God, no. He and Sean Penn, we just had to kind of quietly relax the smoking rules that night. But yeah, that was all out of bill. He,
Hmm.
he had all these people and how he was able, it was remarkable. But
Well,
that was, I remember
would-
Johnny Depp.
Would there be interest currently with the current student body, having people like that, special people come?
Oh, yes. The biggest challenge, to be honest, is to get them. And, we've been, for one glorious week, we had Tom Hanks committed, and I literally thought I was going to have to enter the witness protection program because I didn't think I'd survive the process of getting him in. Well, Meryl Streep was my first tribute, and I remember the event sold out, and the executive vice president's office, I didn't even know what that was here, called, and they needed 25 tickets. And I thought, it was trial by fire. I was like, oh my God, was I supposed to save tickets for the administration? And Bill, I'll never forget, goes, oh, just give them to them. Not everyone's going to show up. We'll have room. I'm like, that was his classic line. Not everyone shows up. So I'd be sweating bullets. And sure enough, not everybody shows up. There's always attrition. People change their minds or get lost or get sick. But he was always like, oversell. And the box office, and I'd be like, I can't oversell. Airlines do it all the time, and the stakes are way higher for them than they are for us. But yes, we're still trying to get them to come. The virtual thing was easier because, all I had to do was get Julian Fellows to figure out how to work the internet. And virtual is not as big an ask, so it's easier. So I think in the future, we're going to try and do a hybrid of, flying people to campus, and we're getting them to Zoom in. So
Right.
that's the plan.
But we keep working on Tom Hanks, please.
Oh, I was driving, I know where I was when I saw the email, and I was like, I think I have to throw up. We have to pull over for a second because I think he just committed. And then the schedule shifted, of course, and he couldn't come. And anyway, but we're going to keep calling him.
Good.
Sydney, you mentioned Maury Rapf and his role in founding the film program at Dartmouth. His son was a classmate and fraternity brother of mine, Bill
I
Rapf.
know that.
Yeah, and Bill explained to me, and I later found out more about the history of it. One of the reasons Maury wound up at Dartmouth, helping to run the film program, is because he was blackballed by Hollywood. He was, yeah, and
he was
and
given a 4 years time off, and
and Bud Schulberg was his best friend growing up. And I think also, I don't know if they were classmates or a class apart.
Yes, Maury was 15. Oh yeah, no, they were actually classes apart because Schulberg, it says here, was 36.
Right, Maury was 35.
Oh, Maury was 35. That's
Yeah.
right. They were a year apart.
Yeah, but they were best friends because both their fathers were studio heads.
Yes.
And they had a falling out because Bud Schulberg named names.
And Maury did.
And then he wrote the screenplay for On the Waterfront, which tried to justify his naming names.
Right.
But they reconciled when both their sons wound up at the entering with the Dartmouth class of '68. Though Bud Schulberg's son never showed up, and
no kidding.
did not come to Dartmouth. But Bill.
Well, I think Bud we honored him with a tribute a couple years before his death, and I think he gave all of his personal effects to Rauner. So I think you can
surprised.
go and see like an original script from On the Waterfront, and some of I think that's my memory of it after was his wife had said, I want to give his personal effects to Rauner for study.
Yeah.
So it's probably up there in there with, Shackleton's Purser's log, which is also a Rauner, which I want to see one day.
and the papers of oh God, what's his name?
Stephenson.
No, I'm thinking the journalist. I can't think.
Mario Puzo.
Well, Mario Puzo is there, but no, this is a guy who I'll remember his name about 3 a.m.
Okay.
And I'll let you know. But
I do my best thinking, so don't worry.
Yeah.
You're in good head company.
I'll wake up screaming his name.
Well, I'd like to tell a quick war story to buttress your point, John Engelman, and yours too, Sydney, that the times really have changed. One time about, 10 years ago at the Canoe Club, the staff was making fun of me for not knowing some contemporary film person. but it would have been a household name in Sydney's mind, but I in fact didn't know.
Not
and they-
everyone recognizes Tom Cruise. Don't worry about it.
No. So anyway, they said, do you know anything about Hollywood? And I said, well, yeah. I said, my aunt used to date a Hollywood movie star, and Sydney's great aunt. And they said, for some time I met Ed, arguably inappropriately at the time of this was going on. And they said, who was that? And I said, Gary Cooper. And no one had ever heard of Gary Cooper.
Oh, my God.
It was a big nothing. They were not impressed about some anonymous guy called Gary Cooper.
Wow. That is sadness because I love him.
Well,
Yeah.
the celebrity actor, TV personality of my generation and earlier, whose name I bring up to find out how connected current undergraduates are with the history of entertainment, is the name Bob Hope, who
Right.
is arguably the most famous person and most recognizable person in the world back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And these kids have never heard of Bob Hope. And it's really makes you feel old and useless. But
So I have another question for Sydney on the older side. So Orton Hicks, who is related to the guy that runs our poster store, it's our movie memorabilia store that's just revived, and Brian Smith is too busy to. I tried to get him to come and tell us all about his grandfather, but do you know a little about Orton Hicks's story?
I think I know that he was an executive at MGM also, where they all were. And I did read something, and he came here to be vice president of the college.
right,
Mhm.
under John Dickey.
Yes, and there was some very funny comment about him, about the fact that he was so devoted to Dartmouth, it wasn't a surprise that he ultimately ended up working here.
Mhm.
He left, you know what, he worked for Lowe's, which was a division of MGM. And it says, when Mr. Hicks left Lowe's to become vice president of Dartmouth College, he asked Arthur Lowe, isn't it great? I think it's great for you, Orton remembers him saying, but I'm not so sure it's wonderful for Dartmouth. Well, what do you mean? Orton said incredulously. And he said, while I've known you, Lowe replied, you've spent 90% of your time for Dartmouth. Based on what I've been paying you, I'd like to know what they think they're going to be paying. I'd like to know what they are paying for that 10%. So apparently he was not a very devoted man to MGM, and he was extremely devoted to Dartmouth. So luckily he ended up in the right place.
Another anecdote about Orton Hicks, he got on the train to go to college, I think from the DC area. And he was planning on getting off in New Haven and going to Yale, and he slept through the New Haven stop and ended up White River Junction. And friends of his on the train who were coming to Dartmouth talked him into enrolling at Dartmouth, and Dartmouth benefited enormously from
Yes.
from his sleeping through the New Haven stop.
Yes, he was a big, all three of them, I think that's what it sort of took, was the three of them bringing each of their own strengths and their Hollywood connections helped fund the Lowe Theater. And that
Yeah.
name came with it. We left in 2013, the Black Family Visual Arts Center opened. At the time it wasn't named, so we just kept calling it the VAC. And when we took the theater out of the Hood Museum, we took the name because it's endowed, and that's why it's still called the Lowe. It's now called the New Lowe.
Yeah.
And it's got 237 seats, so it's a little bit bigger than the one under the Hood. And you don't have to be under the Hood Museum now, which was an enormous plus. They've now got their own theater there for their own internal use. And so we left Spalding several years ago when the VAC opened, and we moved pretty much most of our program because then we could program on the weekends, which is the times when people really want to see movies. So we ended up taking that. That was one of the shifts that we did under, when I was here, is moving fully into the new theater and going digital, which happened in 2012.
Sydney, I have to go, but a suggestion, if you want to attract a big audience with a movie that has a Dartmouth connection, show Animal House in Spalding.
Yeah. Yes. Well, when we had Kevin Bacon here, he was in Animal House. It
Yes,
was
he
his
was.
first film.
Oh, that's right, he was.
So we actually took him,
Please, sir,
to
may I
AD,
have some more?
which I would not go in, thank God, but he did go in, and I think he was, chaperoned with other students, and I was like, please just let him get out alive. I think he even played
I-
a little song with the students.
I was there because that's my fraternity.
Wow.
So,
You guys are also
and Bill Rapp's
well-mannered.
fraternity too.
And whose?
And Bill Rapp's, Maury
Oh,
Rapp's.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll keep it in mind because, that movie never grows old.
So I did gather that Orton Hicks was, his claim to fame was movie distribution. So he was one of the people that's got Hollywood films distributed around the world. So he was flying around the world. And while he was doing that, he was meeting with Dartmouth alums all over the world and Dartmouth clubs all over the world. So that's why the whole thing about who he was working for, MGM or Dartmouth.
Or Dartmouth. That's great.
Yeah, and so that's why he was able to step over and work for Dartmouth, because he'd already kind of been doing that.
And it also, they were smart. They gave honorary degrees to these guys back when that was probably not even considered a viable option. I'm just looking at this saying that, they get Hornblow and Schulberg and Joe Losi. They all got honorary degrees. So it even tied them more. And I think what's really remarkable is that Dartmouth continues, there's a big film program here and their students make work. We have 200 films. The programming board plays film, the Nugget plays film. I think, and then there's little groups and academic departments have series. I feel like there's a lot of.
And the White River group that's doing them now.
Yep. White River Indie Fest.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot, and this club was going to have our first ever film festival last March of 2020, and like 3 days before we were going to have this nice documentary film festival with one of the filmmakers, and it was going to be a lot of fun, and then COVID restrictions hit. So we were going to show, well, the one that wasn't a documentary was going to be Schlitz on Mount Washington. So we ended up streaming that one, but Lowell Thomas's granddaughter lives in the area, so she gave me a whole little spiel about Schlitz on Mount Washington. But we were going to show some of the student films, which are available on Vimeo, which is really great. We selected from those, and then Ben Silberfarb was letting us show some of his. And then our afternoon piece was going to be Raise the Roof, which is not done by an alum, but featured an alum. So it's about Polish synagogues.
That's right.
Yeah, and so we were going to honor Ed Levin, who was the alum, the timber framer alum that was involved with it, and he had passed away. And so we were going to honor him, and some of the filmmakers were going to come up from Massachusetts. So it was going to be this very exciting film event for our first ever Dartmouth Club the Upper Valley film event, and then nothing happened. So, and we were going to have Sydney, we were trying to convince Sydney to be our MC at that point, but she had a conflict. So we were trying to talk John Chapin into being our MC. So we were dabbling our toe in the film world about 15 months ago as a club, and hopefully we'll be able to show some of those films, because some of the student films are quite interesting and quite good. And I also found some things online, because online is so fun to look on things for YouTube. I found the films from the canoe trip behind the Iron Curtain that was featured in National Geographic. They actually did films, took films while they were doing that. And so I had that, and I had paired it with a little bit of the Passion for Snow, the 10th Mountain Division. So so a little bit of Cold War, pre-war stuff. And so I was looking forward to, being a film festival producer, for 15 minutes when COVID sort of shot me in the kneecaps, because it's quite fun. I should have discovered film before. So I'm thinking that what we should do is go around the table here, and everybody, since all of us went to Dartmouth at some point in some different way as students or alums or residents, talk about the favorite film we saw at Dartmouth. And so some of you may be in Sydney's era and some of you may be from way before Sydney's era. So I'm going to nominate John Chapin to he's looking pensive. What's your favorite film that you've seen in Hanover or at Dartmouth?
He ran a restaurant for like 160 years.
I know,
Then
but
he
I'm
had
putting
to
on
be
the
there every
spot.
night.
I don't know if I've seen any films since The Great Escape. No, I guess I can't look back. I'll put my thinking cap on.
Okay. How about Mr. Sean Akhtar? I'm doing this in the order in which you are on my screen, which I think is alphabetical. So, Sean, do you have any memorable films that you saw at Dartmouth?
There have been a lot. I've really enjoyed the programming of the Hop Films program over the years. I don't know about a singular favorite, but I remember, I think it was summer of maybe 2019 when the original Star Wars trilogy was shown. And that
Oh.
was a lot of fun. I definitely understand and appreciate what you're saying, Sydney, about the opportunity to move to the new Low Theater, which is really nice. But I really love when we're able to go to Spalding, because there's nothing like that huge screen and having the energy of I don't know how many, 700, 800 people it is, but a
You're
lot of fun
absolutely
from
right.
that.
And that is a film you got to see on the big screen.
Yeah.
That's a great one.
Okay, next up would be Pete and Ruth. What was your favorite?
Well, I have to say, I was a class of 1961, and the Hopkins Center was built in 62. And Sydney said Spalding opened in 63. So I didn't see any movies at Spalding. I went to the Nugget.
But what
A lot of weekends. So I don't have any favorite.
Particular one? Okay. Peter Corin, you're up next. Uh-oh, is Peter still with us? He's got to learn, he's got to unmute. Oops. Peter, what was your favorite movie that you saw at Dartmouth?
Well, it was actually, they were playing Citizen Kane, and I viewed that as Spalding, and I loved it. And then on the off-color side, they previewed Animal House because it just came out while we were there. And just, it's a good mix, right?
Absolutely. The sacred and the profane.
Mhm.
That's awesome.
Let's see, I know Greg Ames is probably still off running his errands. So Amy Nachman and/or Henry Nachman. So while they're unmuting, Henry told me that when he was president of the Dartmouth Club of New York City, they did a film event for their Dartmouth Club at Lincoln Center with Lillian Gish as their guest for it. So that was Henry's event. So
we had Sydney Stowe.
I know we had Sydney Stowe and we got to stay at home for it. So there's some advantages to that. So I'm guessing Amy and Henry aren't going to unmute and give us what they've said. So Genia, how about you? What's one of your favorite movies from Hanover, Nugget or the Hopkins Center? You're going to have to unmute. Uh-oh, some of our audience may have gone off to dinner here.
Last night,
There you are, last night.
I saw one of my favorite films,
Mm-hmm.
and cried again, Out of Africa.
Oh.
Robert Redford, Be Still My Heart, and Meryl.
Junior, that's my partner's favorite movie as well.
Oh,
He
yeah.
loves that film.
Why?
He loves that film too. So you're in good company.
And I see some of our audience had left already, some of our lower tier audience, which is fine. That is what happens in movies. It used to happen a lot more. Those of us who remember the movie theaters where you would go in and you would start watching the show at whatever point you showed up. And then because it was shown again, then you would watch the beginning of it and then leave, when you got to the part where you'd started. So some of my more memorable ones were Shout, which was, it never did well in the theater, but they did it at Spalding, and it was one of those premiere ones, and it was about sound quality. and this guy that like had this magic ability to like shout so loudly that I'm not sure quite what happened. And I seem to remember Alan Bates or somebody like that was in it. Another one that was good for Spalding is Ben-Hur. Nowhere near as good on a black and white little TV screen as it is on the big screen. It's much better on the big screen. But my most memorable one from undergraduate at Dartmouth was Alien in the Nugget Theater.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. When my date who was sitting beside me, we were all like this. All of a sudden, when we got to one of the scariest parts, grabbed my leg because he was so scared, and I just about jumped through the ceiling. And that's different. Watching movies in a theater is different than watching them at home on your sofa with a little bitty screen. It's just a different experience. So, Ruth, unmute yourself. I can see your. Ruth would like to say something. Oh, Ruth, can you unmute? No, you need to unmute. Take your microphone off. That's to unmute.
Oh.
No.
Do you think you have the master mute on?
I don't think so. It says ask to unmute.
Okay.
There we go. Yay.
So I didn't go to Dartmouth, but I went to Cornell where we watched good movies there. And at that time, there was all the Swedish movies that were the rage.
Oh.
They were just wild. I mean, lots of sex that we did not have in our movies then.
Cornell has, by the way, an incredible program. Yeah, Cornell's is really, they have a remarkable program. I actually regularly subscribe to their newsletter to see what they're playing. They do an incredible job with their films.
It was good then, don't know now.
Yeah, well, they're really, I give them a ton of props. They still have that line between commercial and artistic, and they really ride it well. It's a really wonderful program.
And one of the differences when John Engelman was talking about the falling off of movie attendance and so on, partly is because for many years we didn't have televisions in our rooms, and in the dorms there weren't any televisions in the dorm rooms. So if you wanted more entertainment that you could get from reading a book or listening to the radio, then and there was no internet, then you went to the movies. So that, you could go to the live theater too, but that was a little bit less often. So that was one of the reasons why sports and the Film Society were so massively popular.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think we're getting up close to the witching hour, but
We are.
I can't resist linking together two of the people who have been mentioned tonight, which would be Arthur Hornblow and Gary Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
When I was, this is maybe 1975, I was a cop in Hartford, Connecticut, and I had this business where I provide drivers for people using their cars and I gave the work to various cops and firemen, and I would take a little piece of it. Well, Terry Hornblow, who was Arthur's son, asked me if I would find someone to go pick up his stepmother who was coming up for Thanksgiving. And I said, oh yeah, I can find someone. Well, I called around and no one wanted to go down to New York City on Thanksgiving and then drop them back down at the end of the weekend. So I said, I'll be the chauffeur. And I went down, and I don't know if I knew beforehand, but his stepmother was Myrna Loy, and the Thin Man series. So I'm driving 3 hours each way, which was fascinating. She was delightful. She did not treat me as the chauffeur. I think on the way back, I said to her, so she said, have you ever been to Hollywood? And I said, no, I haven't. I said, and I told him the story about my aunt and her romance with Gary Cooper. And I said, you must have known him. He'd be at least overlapping with your era. I didn't know which side of her age he was. And she said, Gary, I know him very well. We grew up on adjoining ranches in Montana. I almost drove off the road. I was so stunned because at the time there must have been like, 100,000 people maximum in the whole state of Montana. And she said, and she used the word bullshit with me. She said, John, she said, the thing about him being the rugged cowboy, he was a little prince out there in Montana. He had his suits custom made in London while he was posing as a cowboy in Hollywood and in Montana for that matter. So I was fascinated by that whole little small world thing.
I have a quick question. Sue, you said that Henry Nachman is on the call. Is that?
Let's see, on the, we've got Amy Nachman's name here. So that usually means Henry is here.
Right.
So.
Well, he's in my book. So that's why I was, the Dartmouth and Hollywood book about the opening of the Low Auditorium. He's right here as Mr. Henry Nachman Jr., steering committee for the New York event. So there you are.
There you are. Okay.
When you said his name, I was like, oh, wait, I read that
sounds
today when I
familiar,
was
yeah.
doing my history. So.
Yeah, so Henry keeps an eye on us. He's let's see, he's 2 presidents back from me. So it was Chuck before me and Henry before Chuck. So we're in the succession here of the Dartmouth Club of the Upper Valley. So since Greg has gotten back, he's our recorder. You'll be our final person. What was your favorite movie that you saw at Dartmouth, either at Nugget or at Spalding or something? We'll put you on the spot.
That's an easy question.
Yeah.
It was the Nugget.
Uh-huh.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Oh.
There you
See,
go.
that's my politically correct answer because that's the first date my wife and I went on.
Oh, that's so cute.
You know how many times, at least twice a year, we get someone who's like, can you tell me what movie you played in September of 74? Because I was there and there was like a robot. And honestly, I'm like, can you give me a day? And we go into the files. Well, because people are like, that was my first date. This is the woman I want to marry. Or this is, I can't, probably twice a year. And we go into our files and we pull up all the seasons and we ask them like, or they're like, I know it was this title. And I'm like, sir, that could be a little bit of a mud, but it is, I understand. They're very memorable moments. I remember seeing Star Wars in a theater. So that's the joy about movies.
Yep. I remember that too.
Yep. It's on that silver nitrate on the screen. That does it. Does it for me. So I hope you're all going to come back. We've got, the college is super strict. Actually, the HVAC system in Spalding is really quite good. Thank God. I'm not sure Wilson Hall is fit for humans yet, but they're going to make sure that the HVAC systems are at fully functioning, and, people will come back and sit and there's a bunch of stuff coming out. In the Heights is opening this summer, and mainly more Hollywood tentpole stuff, but there's a lot of content that's just been sleeping for a year and ready to the new Bond film this fall. So hopefully everyone will get out there and go to the movies. I don't even care where you go. Go to the Nugget. The
So
Nugget's
what's the Film Society this fall? Do we have a theme?
No, not yet. I think that they're still trying to figure out what they want to do and who we have. But I think the Nugget's going to open in the middle of June. And so fingers crossed that at least with their outstanding popcorn. And then we are going to do a series of outdoor movies this summer.
Oh, good.
Virtuals, but mainly we're going to pivot to outdoors.
Yeah.
Let's just pray for, clear weather. And if you haven't gone to the drive-in, there's one in Fairleigh and one in Randolph, I think, or Barnard. No, Randolph. I don't know where. Oh, anyway, they're also really fun, and they'll have first run films. So that's another. So get out and find your movies wherever they are.
Yes. All right. So thank you, Sydney. It's been lovely.
Thank you. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah. And Greg will at some point process our recording and put it up on YouTube. I don't know if we actually put anything up on YouTube yet from the various things we recorded, but at some point we will do. We don't have a producer, you see, so we don't have anybody driving the process, but we will eventually get things put up there. So thank you very much. So we'll give you a big round of applause.
Nice to meet everyone. And
Bethel Drive-In.
That's it.
Bethel. Okay.
Oh my God. I got to tell you.
I
It
knew
is,
about the Fairleigh. I didn't know about Bethel. That's awesome.
Bethel is actually better. Fairleigh has the amazing burgers, I will not lie. But Bethel is enclosed, so bring your own food for Bethel, but it's smaller and enclosed. And we saw Jurassic there last summer, and I am telling you, I nearly came out of my chair. The Bethel Drive-In is really quite good. So I cannot recommend it. It's a haul to get there, but it feels more old time, Fairleigh's giant, and Bethel feels much more intimate and a little more, it's in more of a bowling alley kind of setup, but I can't recommend it enough. It's worth it.
Well, it says opening in June
There you go.
2021. So
Yay. All right. Well, thank you,
Hey,
everyone.
See you all at the movies.
Yes, we'll see you at the movies and see you at Telluride. Take care.
Bye-bye.
thank
Bye.
you.
And I usually stay on and chat until the last person leaves.